Christmas is coming, and it's going to be amazing. And so this year, as I always do every year, sometimes sometimes I can feel as a pastor that this is a bit rhythmic, that like when it comes to the holiday seasons, whether it's Christmas or Easter, there's this sense of, okay, I got to preach about Christmas stuff and I got to preach about Easter stuff. But, as I'm praying about this and just asking God, like, what is it that you want me to say to the church? What is it that you want me to speak to people who are here or listening online or whatever about this season? And God just kept saying to me, believe, believe, believe. Now I know that we watch all these different movies. We are immediately confronted with all the Hallmark stuff, and now Netflix and other streaming websites have got on the bandwagon. They're releasing all these terribly corny movies. I've thought to myself this year, okay, I know what I'm going to do. This year, I'm going to make my kids watch every cheesy, corny, horrible movie that was ever produced about Christmas before they make me sit down and watch the junk that they're producing today. Because they're like, oh, well, it's going to be so cute, so fun. And I'm like, no, see, they're just recreating what they already created, years ago. Anyway, but we know that this time of year, people consider it a magical season. And they attribute that magic to a jolly guy. Now, I know that, there are some people that just really want to confront the idea of Santa and tear him down and all that stuff and, all that, whatever it is. All right, track with me for just a minute here, okay? But we often attribute the magical experience of Christmas to something that's going on within us, or just the, delight of this time of year, and people are different, people are feeling more generous, and all these different things. But I want to make sure that when we think of the idea believe, when we consider the thought of believing, that we would allow ourselves to stop being so distracted by consumerism and start being brought into the idea that Jesus indeed came to this earth through a virgin birth, and that he had a purpose and intent. And I know that the Christmas story itself can become too familiar. And so my prayer is that maybe as we visit familiar stories in the Bible, as we visit familiar things that we know about, that God would perhaps open our eyes to something new and fresh, or maybe remind us of something that we are already familiar with, but it's become common. And so this morning, though, I want to preach to you guys about hope, or another way of putting it, the Lord is with you. Now, there's this story in Luke chapter 1, and this story is around a guy who was born with the mission or the purpose to be the one who would announce Jesus' coming. He would be the one who would declare for those around him that Jesus had been born, that he was the Redeemer, that he was the one who would be the good news. John the Baptist. Now, John the Baptist, when he got older, he was this kind of like weird guy who ran around in the woods, ate locusts and honey and all that different kind of stuff, wore bear skins. I don't know. But this guy, for whatever reason, had this magnetic personality, and people were drawn to him. For whatever reason, people were interested in what he was saying, and in that interest of what he was saying, he was foretelling. He was the one who would speak about Christ before Christ even began to reveal himself. Now, John the Baptist was born of Zechariah and Elizabeth, some very, very old people who Elizabeth was told and began to understand that she was barren, and that birth or conception itself wasn't possible. Now, I'm going to read the story from the New Century Version of the Bible. Track along with me for just a second, and then I'm going to make some points to you guys this morning. So, during the time of Herod, during the time Herod ruled Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to Abijah's group. And Zechariah's wife, Elizabeth, came from the family of Aaron. Continuing on. Zechariah and Elizabeth truly did what God said was good. They did everything the Lord commanded and were without fault in keeping his law. But they had no children, because Elizabeth could not have a baby, and both of them were very old. One day, Zechariah was serving as a priest before God because his group was on duty. According to the custom of the priests, he was chosen by lot to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. There were a great many people outside praying at the time the incense was offered. And then the angel of the Lord appeared to Zechariah, standing on the right side of the incense table. And when he saw the angel, Zechariah was startled and frightened. But the angel said to him, "Zechariah, don't be afraid. God has heard your prayers. Your wife Elizabeth will give birth to a son, and you will name him John. He will bring you joy and gladness. Many people will be happy because of his birth. And John will be a great man for the Lord. He will never drink wine or beer, and even from birth, he will be filled with the Holy Spirit. He will help many people of Israel return to the Lord their God. He will go before the Lord in spirit and power like Elijah. He will make peace between parents and their children, and will bring those who are not obeying God back to the right way of thinking, to make people ready for the coming of the Lord." Zechariah said to the angel, "How can I know that what you say is true? I'm an old man, and my wife is old too." And the angel answered him, "I am Gabriel, and I stand before God, who sent me to talk to you and tell you this good news. Now listen. Now listen." Have you ever guys heard that? Now listen, this is important. Here's where it gets kind of okay. "You will not be able to speak until the day these things happen, because you did not believe what I told you. But they will happen." Outside, the people were still waiting on Zechariah and were surprised that he was staying so long in the temple. And when Zechariah came outside, he could not speak to them. And they knew he had seen a vision in the temple. And he could only make signs to them and remained unable to speak. And when his time of service at the temple finished, he went home. Later, Zechariah's wife Elizabeth became pregnant and did not go out of her house for 5 months. Elizabeth said, "Look what the Lord has done for me. My people were ashamed of me, but now the Lord has taken away that shame." Now we know that there's more to the story when Mary and Elizabeth meet, and Elizabeth has this incredible moment where John jumps in her stomach and reveals and how he's empowered by the Spirit. It's just this incredible mom-to-mom moment. But this morning I want to talk to you about this event, this experience right now, what's happening in this moment. Now, just in way of kind of leading up to some of the things I want to share, I want to tell you this, okay? And this is a familiar thought. I find myself often in sermon conversations or sermons that I share with you guys that life isn't always what we expected. Life isn't always what we expected. Now, I like the good unexpected things. I like when something surprises me. My wife does not like surprises. I no longer come home in the afternoon after work and say, "Guess what? We're going on a date tonight." "What? Why didn't you tell me? Look at the house. It's trash." Now, it's not really trash. You didn't give me an opportunity to prepare for it. She doesn't like surprises like that. No, never. I know she threw me a surprise 40th birthday party this last, in August. If I were to throw her a surprise, whatever birthday it is, you might see your minister punched. Just saying. And my kids can to attest that she's really that aggressive. Anyway, no, but sometimes life comes at us in unexpected ways. I like the good unexpected, but I don't like the bad unexpected. We have these plans, we have these ideas, we have these thoughts. This is how things are going to go. This is how things are going to turn out. I've got it all figured out. I've got my plans together. I'm going to this college. I'm going to get this degree. I'm going to learn this thing, and I'm going to go for it. I'm going to marry this person. We're going to have these kids. Like, we got it all planned out. Like, I don't know how each of, like, we have children that are exactly 3 years apart. I don't know how it happened like that. All I know is that when we moved here, my wife was like, we have 3 kids, and it's uneven. We got to have a 4th. All right, there was more reasons why we had more than that. But anyway, we love the unexpected of life at times, but sometimes we don't like the unexpected. And when we think about the unexpected, oftentimes we gravitate towards the bad things that happen. Like, when we think of unexpected things, we rarely talk about the good unexpected, and we often talk about the bad unexpected. Like, we rarely think about the things that, that go well with us, and we think about the things that did not go well with us. And so, like this was an unexpected event in Elizabeth's life. Everything about her life, everything about her and Zechariah was, detailed. Like perhaps at the beginning of their relationship, the beginning of their marriage, they assumed that they were going to have children, but they did not have children. That was unexpected. Like, this isn't fair. This isn't right. I thought we were going to have kids and it was going to be great. Our relationship and our marriage was going to be great. I'm sure that it caused strain and issues. They expected something out of their marriage, out of their relationship. It didn't happen. So then they grew to expect that they would just die without any kids. But then something unexpected happened. And Zechariah is like, what? What? Now, if you look at the cultural context, you would know that being barren equaled shame for Zechariah and Elizabeth's life. Zechariah and Elizabeth, their life wasn't turning out the way that they'd hoped. Now, I have looked up some different things online recently, but according to statistics, right now, 1 in 8 women cannot conceive. 1 in 8 women cannot conceive. Now, I know that we have the advancement of modern medicine where doctors have learned different techniques, different ways to make a pregnancy possible, even when it is physically, naturally not possible. Where it's physically, naturally not possible. This wasn't the first time that an old man and woman would conceive. And in Sarah and Abraham's fear and worry that they would not have a child, Sarah decided to give Abraham her servant to have a child. That's how things worked out then. Like they would say, okay, well, we want kids, but we can't have kids, so I'm going to give him to someone else in hopes that he can have a kid with somebody else. Like that was a scenario, that was a situation, because being barren was a humiliating experience. When you had an empty womb, when you could not produce children, it was seen as something that was wrong with your life. You were sinful, you were broken. God was punishing you by telling you, you will have no offspring. And she was childish. They were childless. They were alone. They were old. She was barren. And her deepest, most meaningful role had been stripped away by an inability of her body. And the emptiness of her womb was perhaps only surpassed by the emptiness of her spirit. Unfortunately, not everyone experiences the miraculous conception. Many remain childless. Many remain infertile. And so, just in a way of just kind of bringing this out a little bit more, empty spirits are all around us. Empty spirits are all around us. You ever come in contact with somebody, they're like, I'm going to have the Christmas spirit, and they're just like, okay. And you look at them, they're talking, they're speaking, they're saying stuff, and you're like, you're totally faking it right now. Like, I don't believe you. That's not real. That's not real. You look miserable. You look unhappy. You look dissatisfied. Like, I feel like, for whatever reason, holiday seasons, especially Christmas time, have a way of just kind of like focusing in. It's a magnifying glass on some of our life's greatest disappointments. Like it just creates this area, this microscope, if you will, that focuses on our emptiness, focuses on our barrenness, focuses on the things that make us feel alone and make our spirits feel empty. It's in our family, all right? It's in the people around us. It's in the people we work with. It may be in our own spouse or, whoever that significant love is in our life. It could be in our children. We could be the ones experiencing the emptiness. However, emptiness is not the last word. While we know that Advent, as we hear it, or the Christmas season, or the birth of Christ, it does not ignore emptiness, neither is it about emptiness. It is the fullness of time that Jesus first came. Perhaps we could say his role was to inspire hope. John the Baptist's role was to inspire hope. Perhaps we can also say that about our role. Listen to this statement. We live at a time when hope seems to be a reckless abandon. We live in a time when hope seems to be a reckless abandon to things not afforded to the common man or woman. It's silly to think that our world situation could change. Like we look at things around us and we're just like, okay, I don't know about this. I don't know how this thing's going to improve. I don't know how this thing's going to get better. I don't know how this situation's going to change. I mean, all it takes is for us to look at the news, social media feeds for just a few minutes, and we can immediately feel a sense of oppression. Like we just feel depressed right away. Like I know that we can look at the good news, the good articles, the good things that are happening and make. Here's the horrible thing though. Like we could look at 10, 15, 20 good things, inspiring articles, so to speak, or read good things in the newspaper. Somebody did something that was really kind or benevolent. And it's like, whoa, that's good. And we could read all these different stories of incredible stuff. Check this out. This is wonderful. And then read one or two negative stories in the news or in the headlines, or hear one negative thing about the community you live in or from a family member, and all those positive, good, encouraging things suddenly fade into the background, and we're immediately focused on what feels like is so oppressive and depressing. And so hope is tangible though. Hope is tangible. Hope is something that we can feel. Hope is something that we can taste. Hope is real. It is real. It can be heard. It can be tasted. It can be smelled. It can be touched. It can be felt. Yes, it appears magical, but it's more than magical. It's a supernatural gift given to every single one of us. Being magical can be fun. It can be fun. We can experience magical things, and that's fun. And that makes me feel good and a little excited. But I'm not talking about magical. I'm talking about something supernatural. I'm talking about something that affects us, something that's real. When we consider the birth of Jesus and what he did for us, what he came to accomplish, when we think of Advent, we can be amazed. We can move from just a magical feeling that quickly fades away from us. As soon as the Christmas holiday is over, that magical nostalgia begins to wane. You ever notice that Thanksgiving, I watched it happen this last week, and I heard stories about it. Thanksgiving is ooh, I'm thankful, I'm generous. We are a nation that turns from, grateful, all right, and giving to consumeristic in one day. It's Thanksgiving, family, I will cut you for that. You ever been to the Black Friday sales? Follow track with me for a minute, okay? When Kelly and I lived in the city area in Ohio, we would go to these different Black Friday sales, and they were crazy. I mean, people did silly things. I remember I was living in Dayton, Ohio, and how many of you guys remember the store? Anybody know Meijer? Have you guys ever heard of the store Meijer? No, okay, some of us have. Anyway, so we're in this store Meijer. They're having this huge Black Friday sale, and I'm walking down the aisles, and I look down the aisle, and all of a sudden I see these two women. All right, now, Keep in context the area that we're living in. This woman begins to take off her rings, and she tells her friend to hold her earrings. And I'm like, oh boy, this does not look good. All right, so these ladies in an aisle begin to box. I mean, they were like fighting. And I'm like looking around like, what's going on? What's going on? They were fighting over a pillow. I can't make this stuff up. Like, I cannot. I cannot. We live in a time, all right, as a nation, as a culture, not everybody is guilty of this. Don't take it personal, okay? Not everybody is guilty of this, but sometimes we sway in one direction of being generous, benevolent, kind, loving, compassionate, giving, to this other side where we consume, we take, we want to gather to ourselves. But you know, in this this idea that life is magical, that we have these magical experiences. If we look to what is magical, we will find something that quickly fades. But if we look to what is supernatural, we look to what is Jesus and what he means, what he does, the truth of who he is, and the fact that he was born, we will see things entirely differently. 4 points. Hope begins with a rejection of shame. Hope begins with a rejection of shame. Elizabeth's barrenness is her disgrace. All right? It was her disgrace. This was something she couldn't hide from. This was something that she couldn't exit. You know, this was something that she couldn't pretend wasn't real. In their communities, it was different. People knew things. People knew things pretty rapidly. I mean, I know that happens in our communities, okay? But for her, being barren was a humiliating experience. It was something that shamed her, and there was no way of her hiding that. Can you imagine for a minute walking around feeling like you were the focal point of people's eyes, saying, that person is being punished by God? We don't know what she did, but she had to do something. And Zechariah, I mean, I know he's a priest and he works in the temple, but I mean, they had to be hiding something. Something must not have been good. Something must not have gone well with them, that God would say, no, you aren't having children. There was no way for her to escape that. There was no way for her to keep that affair private. It was public. It was out in the open. There was nothing that could be hidden. You guys ever have some of your deepest, darkest moments in your life? Some of the things that would bring greatest shame suddenly open-aired? You ever have somebody betray you and tell others something that is very personal, very private? You ever have something come out into the open? Can you imagine for just a minute those who are, you know, and social media might not be the context for certain people, but imagine your community suddenly knowing something that you know without a doubt would bring you complete and total shame. Suddenly knowing that. Imagine walking into this store. Imagine walking into different places and having people look at you and you feeling not their words, but just their look, the attention that they gave you, and feeling shame. Shame. She felt shame. Zechariah felt shame. And at some point in her journey, she had to reject the shame of her previous barrenness and display the grace of God now on display in her body. You know, see, hope can be fragile. Hope can be fragile, but it's not meant to be hidden. So she had to reject shame. Track with me for just a minute. She had to reject shame. We have to reject shame. If we're going to experience the supernatural, if we're going to experience the hope in God, that Jesus is always with us, that he will never abandon us, we've got to reject shame, because shame tells us that we are worthless, that we are alone. Shame puts us in dark corners in an attempt to hide from everything around us. Shame will actually cause us to also hide from God. We've got to reject it. If we're going to experience the hope that Jesus brings to us, not just at Christmas time, but all time, if we're going to experience that, we've got to reject shame. No, this shame is not going to gain control over me. It is not going to hold me. I'm going to reject it. I'm going to say that I am free. God has promises for me. He has given me something to believe in, to have hope for, and all those other things, founded or unfounded, I'm not going to allow to bring shame to me. Hope begins with the rejection of fear. To be renewed in hope, we must recognize our fears. We must recognize our fears. We know that, just bouncing back to that first point, in verse 7, they said they had no children because Elizabeth was unable to conceive. They were both very old. That brought her shame. But in verse 12, it says, Zechariah was shaken and overwhelmed with fear when he saw him. Hope begins with a rejection of fear. He didn't reject it right away, so Gabriel's like, all right, fine. You're not going to be able to talk then. You know? Like, you're not going to be able to talk. And I can contemplate in my mind why he silenced him. I'm not sure. I know that there's scholars that speculate and all that stuff. All I know is Gabriel was like, look, you are scared, you have fear, and you don't believe that God can do this thing. To be renewed in hope, to have that hope experienced in our life, to hope for things, we've got to reject fear. It's important to note that Zechariah is not challenged. He's not condemned on being afraid. He's just quieted. Like maybe perhaps for a minute there, the angel Gabriel knew that if he was allowed to be vocal, he would continue to propagate the fear that existed within him. He would go home to his wife and say, hey, Gabriel said we're going to have a baby, and then just start speaking all of these different things that would create hopelessness and despair. Like, he was afraid. He was afraid. If we're going to experience hope, we've got to push away fear. We've got to push away fear. We've got to push away fear. Let's move on real quick here. Hope begins with an act of faith. In verse 24, it says, soon afterward, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant and went into seclusion for 5 months. Now, I know that everybody wonders, like everybody's like, why did she seclude herself for 5 months? Probably because she wanted to make sure that she was really pregnant. And number two, some people are going to say, is she hiding something? I mean, that lady's old. Like, did she put something in there? She's going to steal some poor younger woman's baby? Or did Zechariah impregnate somebody else and she's just trying to... No, she had to give proof for others. She had to give proof herself. She went into hiding for 5 months like, okay, I got to be real. I got to know that this is true. I've got to know that this is going to actually happen. This baby within me is going to be born. I've got to know that. Can you imagine Zechariah coming home who is unable to speak and telling his wife in some shape or form that she was going to have a baby? Can you imagine him being unable to speak, telling his wife, hey, let's go into the bedroom, okay? Like, I don't know how else to say it than that, can you imagine for a minute? I mean, I could say it in many other ways, but can you imagine for a minute saying to your wife without words, let's go have sex because we're going to have a baby? Can you imagine that? Being that old. Like all the points to say, do I have to spell it out to you? Let me write this down. I can imagine how absurd she thought that was. Maybe she believed right away, okay, well, if he's telling me right now that I'm going to have a child, but he can't say it with his mouth, maybe he did see an angel. Now, if you take the cultural context as well, you would know that women in that time were not as educated as men. So I wonder if she even had the ability to read like he could read, or the ability to read what he wrote like he could write. All I know is that he went home, he was unable to communicate to her in a very clear way because he couldn't speak. All she understood is that God was going to gift her with a baby, that it was going to be a gift of his mercy and his grace, that he was going to gift her a baby, and that they had to act in faith on that belief. They had to act in faith on that belief. The fact that they were old, this is important to understand how God can work in the physical in ways that we cannot even begin to comprehend. Being that old, physically speaking, I'm sure that all the things necessary to function were not necessarily functioning right. You know what I mean? I'm sure that they were thinking, okay, they didn't have the advancement of modern medicine. They didn't have opportunities that are afforded to us today. They had to believe. They had to have faith in that action. I'm going to do what God told me to do, and I'm going to believe that she is going to conceive and she's going to have a baby. They had to act in faith. If we're going to have hope, if we're going to experience hope, we need to act in faith. We need to participate. We need to say, okay, I know that God wants to do this thing. I know that God wants to do a miracle. So yes, I am going to push away shame. Yes, I'm going to reject fear. And I am going to begin to act in faith. I'm going to begin doing it. I'm going to begin to live my life in a way that gives credit to the fact that I believe. I'm going to live in a way that it's happened even though I can't see it, even though I can't notice it right now in this moment. God is going to do what he said he's going to do. God is going to impregnate my wife and she is going to give birth to a child. Yes, we're old, but that is what God said through Gabriel. So what am I going to do? I'm going to act in faith until it happens. Can you imagine the joy that was immediately experienced in that moment? And yet, that whole dispelling fear. Can you imagine the fear that would come into your life? Like, okay, she's pregnant now, but I've got to make sure that she doesn't lose the baby. I'm a little nervous about this. I'm a little scared. I just don't know. No. They had to reject that fear, and they had to believe. And fourth, they had to hope. It begins with the embrace of grace. In verse 25, it says, "How kind the Lord is," she exclaimed. "He has taken away my disgrace and of having no children." Grace is defined as God's gift. We all face a similar challenge to Zechariah and Elizabeth. We face the disgrace of our previous lives, our previous habits, our previous attitudes or failures. Some of those things are not public, but they are definitely existent within us. We may not even experience, people may not look at us to shame us, but they don't have to because the shame already exists within us. People can look at us, talk to us in the most normal form, not to make us feel bad, but just talking to us. And we immediately begin to think and respond to their words. Even though those words have no intent to harm us, we begin to look at their words as shaming us because it is a position we have in our minds, and it is a natural thing that we begin to look at all life. It's the lens through which we look through. She had to accept God's gift. She had to accept it. This is a gift to me. I mean, all the promise, all the wonderful things that God was going to do through John the Baptist. I know that it had to be terrifyingly sad when he was killed. I know that. But Elizabeth conceived, and she was going to give birth, and she was giving birth to a son. She hid for 5 months, but it was real. She was pregnant. He is old, I am old, and I'm going to give birth to a baby. Not only that, but later on in the story, we hear that when Mary and Elizabeth, both pregnant, got close together, babies were jumping in the womb. Like, if I didn't know I was pregnant, now I know I'm pregnant. Like, seriously, something is living in there. Something is existing. I know, right? Well, my wife is... What? Why are you looking at me like that? Okay, so my wife is little. You guys know that. Like, I remember each one of her pregnancies. There were points where it would be like agonizing to her because babies are mean inside the womb. I don't know that. But anyway, like, I could see a foot, an actual foot form pushing against her belly. Like, and then I would it was funny, but not, I mean, maybe it wasn't. It was funny. I would push. I would probably antagonizing, causing issues as a father before they were even born. But I would push, and whatever baby it was would push back, and I push and push back, push. Like, she couldn't even cuddle me, and she would lean over and lean up against me, and I would be laying there, my back to her belly, and I would just hear kicking, get off her. Okay, fine. Okay, fine. Grace used to kick her guitar. Just boom. I don't know why. Anyway. But there was something that happened that gave credit to the fact that she was pregnant. And she began to realize that this was a gift of God. That God, in his grace, had responded to her desperate plea. That God had responded to her desperate plea. Receiving grace through Christ is not an event. Listen to this. This is not an event. The gift of grace is an every single day experience from now into eternity, gifted to us with unconditional love. All right, I am born again. Like we go to that moment, we're like, okay, Jesus, I'm messed up. I'm a sinner. I know I need you. I've got to accept you as my king and ruler and leader. And we say, okay, I experienced his grace. It is not a single event. It is not something that just happens at that moment. It is a continual experience. Oh, today, God's grace. Today, God's grace. God's gifted me. God's giving me new things. God's giving me new hope. God's giving me new inspiration. God's showing me over and over and over again that he's with me, that he's not abandoned me, that he will always walk by my side every single day, every single moment. You need to realize that the very fact that you are breathing and walking and moving and doing what you're doing is a gift from God. Your life is an act of grace. It is not an event. It is every single moment. If I could just kind of wrap this truth that I'm trying to share with you this morning into one, the darkest, barren places of life are the very places where God defies hopelessness and unveils his glory. You got to get that. All of what I'm saying this morning, what I'm trying to tell you most is the darkest, barren places of life are the very places where God defies hopelessness and unveils his glory. You got to get that. You got to. Because each one of us has barren places in our life, and it may not turn out as you expected, but you have to believe that God is going to do things that you can't even begin to comprehend or understand. Let me ask you 4 questions. What is barren? What is the Lord ready to do? What action do you need to take? And what grace are you yet to accept? What is barren? What is empty? What is dark? What do you feel is completely unable to conceive? And in that, what is the Lord ready to do? What act in faith do you need to commit to? And what grace have you yet to accept? What grace have you yet to accept? Church, let me say that again. The darkest, barren places of life are the very places where God defies hopelessness and unveils his glory. There are those of you this morning where God wants to defy hopelessness and unveil his glory. He wants to unveil his glory. Father, I thank you for this morning. I thank you for today. I thank you for every soul gathered in this building, and I thank you for the opportunity to bring what was spoken today into the lives of those around us. And I pray right now, God, that the places in our lives that seem, that feel, that in a very real way are the most barren, the most darkest, Lord, that we would trust you, that we would believe you, that we would have confidence in you, that you would defy hopelessness through your Son, Jesus, and that your glory would be revealed. Make it happen. Not because we're able to within ourselves, but God, you can and you will. I thank you. This morning, may we have the courage and the hope to believe. Amen.